Greetings from the campus of the University of Notre Dame, home of Letras Latinas, the literary initiative at Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies. We have reached double digits, which is to say, this is installment number 10 of Curated Conversations, a Latinx poetry show. Today's episode features Antonio Lopez in conversation with Kathy Park Hong, discussing Antonio's debut collection, Gentification, recently published by Four-Way Books and winner of their Levis Prize. The judge who selected the manuscript was Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and memoirist Gregory Pardlo. Before I introduce Kathy, I'd like to thank our host, the Writers Center, specifically their Director of Communications. Zach Powers has been not only our tech guru, but also our webpage designer. I also want to thank Executive Director Margaret Melanie, who gave her endorsement and support to this initiative from day one. A shout out as well to the Writers Center in-house publication, Poet Lore, another co-presenter. It should come as no surprise that a year-long initiative such as this one would not be possible without funding. The Poetry Foundation is our principal benefactor. I also want to offer heartfelt gratitude to Jim Wilson, whose generosity has made possible a parallel book club component to this initiative. A book club component? What's that, you may ask? Well, we commission a moderator to organize and moderate a live book club discussion of each of the 12 books we've been exploring throughout the year. Book club component, I will be getting in touch with you, Antonio, about who that book club moderator will be. This component would not be possible without our fourth co-presenter, and that is Duende District Bookseller, which is run by Angela Spring. Thank you, Angela. One of the special traits of Curated Conversations is that we ask our featured poets to select their interlocutors. Antonio Lopez has chosen Kathy Park Hong. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and test my memory by saying that I believe Kathy has been to Notre Dame years ago at the behest of my colleague, the poet and publisher Joelle McSweeney, one of the forces behind Action Books. I'm either imagining things or I'm recalling that Kathy has worked with Action Books, perhaps as a translator. And now let me share a little more about her. She's the author of the New York Times best-selling book of creative nonfiction, Minor Feelings, which was published in the spring of 2020 by One Word Random House in the US and Profile Books in the UK. Minor Feelings won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography and was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Mellon for Excellence. As an aside, I'm one chapter into Minor Feelings and already I'm admiring what I'll call its astute alchemy of disclosure and meditation on the contours of race and ethnicity. She is also the author of the following poetry collections: Engine Empire, published by W.W. Norton; Dance, Dance, Revolution, chosen by Adrienne Rich for the Barnard Women Poets Prize; and Translating Mohum. Hong is the recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Prize, the Guggenheim Fellowship, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. Her poetry and prose have been published in the New York Times, New Republic, The Guardian, Paris Review, Poetry, and elsewhere. She is the poetry editor of the New Republic and is a full professor at Rutgers Newark University. Let me close by sharing two snippets of her poetry, which make evident, in my view, the musical possibilities of language. First, from her poem, Notorious, an homage to the late rapper. But Bigita is VIP, sold records in millions, tens. So God sighs, relents, and the Kleenex sky melts to op art swirls of cherry coke red, burning up, white magnolias into a chain link planet of asphalt and black cell phone towers. and from her poem, Ballad in A. Kansan's cantata rang at that Ramada ranch. Mañana, Kansan snarls. I'll have an armada and thwart law's brawn. Slam law a damn mass warpath. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Park Hong.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. It's been a long time. I wish this was in person, Antonio. I think the last time you were in Newark, I was in Newark, and we, shared many conversations in the classroom and in my office about poetry, race, politics, and your book, which I just loved. And so I'm really thrilled to talk to you about it. Your book, Gentification, it's vertiginous, radical, crackling. It's a mongrel of a book that weaponizes Spanish and English to form a music that's musical, music that's vulnerable and powerful. And it's really just really wonderful to see the book take off and how it grew from its infancy in Newark to this kind of complete journey that it is now. And one thing I love about the book is also how it's ambivalent. There's just these questions of American exceptionalism, assimilation, questions of affirmative action. And at core is a question of family and education, and how education or achievement is both, yes, a personal gain, but also means a kind of separation. Gentification obviously is a play on gentrification of your, I read gentrification as a gentrification of your hometown, which is now pretty much the new metaverse, I guess you could say, or Silicon Valley, Facebook, and so on. But it's also, I read gentification as a gentrification of the self through, because of, elite white education where one's English is standardized, homogenized. And with this power of knowledge in the book, there's a lot of searing questions of doubt and confusion, which feels very honest to me. And also actually, in the book, there are just a lot of conversions that take place, both intentional and unintentional. And I'm also interested in I'm also fascinated by the Muslim faith, that is also at odds with the family heritage and the colonial faith of Catholicism. And also there are also these like new ways of expression, like this term that you coined, magical for realism, which I love.
Yeah.
I love it. So I want to just, that's just a few of the many. I mean, it's a really, really dense book. There's just so much brilliant wordplay, and also so much thinking in heart in the book. And this is a question just for myself, because when I saw the manuscript, the thesis, I definitely recognized the structure, and I definitely recognized, many of the poems, but it's also evolved in so many ways. And I wanted you to first start off and talk about your journey working on this book. I'm curious about how you continued to draft this book post MFA, post this shelter of a creative writing program. What was your process in writing and revising this poem? And when did you know it was finally a book that you could send out?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Kathy, and just Francisco and Notre Dame for having us come together. And I'm just in awe of all the wonderful things you said, kind of introing the book, and still to that. I think Yeah, I got you to thank in big part because I don't think it's a big top secret to say you were my advisor to this manuscript, and
Yeah.
so you saw the bare bones of it. And I remember you sitting down with me and saying, and so you got to think about poems like a score. You just have this kind of, you're this long poet. And I think we got to recognize our trade-offs as writers, right? If, I'm someone who's coming in from the, Whitman, Whiteman bag of like these multitudes, right? I'm like, I have these long songs for community. And so how do I counterbalance that with talking about the self? And I think those were conversations that I had with you, I had with Rigoberto, I had with the workshop. And so I had kind of some idea that, okay, there are long poems in this piece that need to be excised and maybe rearranged, and I got to start thinking more about sectioning. I have the raw, organic matter of the poems, and I think by the end of it, I ended up switching up maybe 3 or 4 of them, not a substantial amount, but some. But by and large, I had what I needed in the book, but what lacked was the structure. And I think I was so deep in the sauce when I was in Rutgers with you that I needed to take a little bit of time to take a step back and see what are the implications of the book? What am I really trying to wrestle with? What is the heart and crux of the concerns in this book? And, as I started to do that after I graduated, which is the wonderful ceremony, I don't know if y'all ever graduated from master's program, but in Rutgers, we had it with the PhDs and we got our little cap and gown and, I don't know what the term is, but you put the collar, I don't know what it is, but that was fun. But I would say after Rutgers, I spent some time maybe in Florida, different parts of the US, and I just I was still obsessed with figuring out this book, like a Rubik's Cube almost. And I remember that I sent it out to a couple close homies, shout out to Willie Palomo, for instance. I sent it out to him and I was like, yo, like, what do you think this book is lacking? What do you think this book, needs to do? And by and large, again, people, the feedback was, you got to think about sections, you got to think about organizing this piece so that the poems really sing. And I finally dawned on the idea of a syllabus at some point during the summer, maybe late fall of after I graduated from Rutgers. So we're talking 2018. And I got to tell you, I would carry that book, carry that manuscript everywhere. Like if I'd go to a cafe, if I had a couple books, I might turn to that manuscript again. If I remember spending it quite a few times at a random Krispy Kreme. I was just like, all right, like I'm here. I'll get a hazelnut coffee, and I'm gonna figure out this book because I'm really like stubborn about it. And I remember I told you like at some point I was like, no, I'm serious. I want to get this thing really banged up and polished. And the syllabus structure came. And I think once I got the syllabus, I was like, all right, like now we can move things around. And I think once I had that skeleton and I understood that I'm going to have a very nerdy book that is going to examine this brown boy, scholarship boy going and traversing through multiple worlds. Once I had that structure, it became a lot easier to rearrange the poems. I feel like 90% of a poetry manuscript is just arrangement. We have the actual poems. We might have some fillers here and there, but it's how are you sequencing the song? How are you structuring that score, as you said to me many moons ago? And so I think I took that advice to heart. And I remember too, like even before I graduated, I'll end with this, that one of the classmates from the fiction writer, he just looked at he was reading through at that point we had the physical thesis in the writing center, in 53 Bleecker Street. And I showed him the draft and he's like, you might want to do a sonnet every now and then. And so I think that pithiness, that maintaining a dynamism in a poem that is so much about this long narrative, I think was really something that I understood needed to be done. And so obviously turning to sound, turning to excision, turning to rearrangement, those kinds of things were really breaths of fresh air that I needed to really incorporate later on in the manuscript process. And when I knew it was ready, I mean, I don't think I ever thought it was ready per se. I just thought I'm comfortable enough with this to know that this represents the time capsule of my first book of poems. And in retrospect, I'm like, this poem could have been, finished here, or maybe I should have taken this one out, or is this poem too, this book a little too long? All those questions are fair game, but I also think like, we're in the business of writing many books, hopefully. And so I have time and grace to grow. And so I'm not too caught up in this idea that it's got to be perfect or I'm going to know exactly when it's going to be done. I just have an instinct of, okay, I like this project. I like this collection as it is. I'm ready to have the world see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, it definitely feels like a time capsule of just you as it captures. It's like a portrait of you say a brown boy, a portrait of a brown boy, or miseducation, and this is all that miseducation is definitely scaffolded through the syllabus structure, which is great. And seeing the revision now, like I remember reading the earlier versions, and it was just, yes, it was lots of long poems. They're all lots of really passionate long poems, but I was like, Antonio, you need to have some breath. You need to breathe. And now there's like the book is breathing. It's great, And then there's just like these really great poems and that are like a call to arms. I want to talk a little bit about. I'm sure you've gotten this question asked before, but about the diction in the poem, about the Spanish and the English and the wordplay between that. And I wanted to ask you why it's important. I think there's a point, and I think actually Gregory of Pardlo also mentioned it in his intro. Why is it important? Well, it's a two-part question. Why is it not important not to translate the Spanish? And what did you mean when you say it takes 3 minutes to Google my shit? And I just wanted to talk about sort of your use of Spanish and English and kind of bouncing between the two, and if it's if there's a political motivation to it, or is it sonic, musical? It's probably all three, but I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. So.
Oh yeah, and it's one of those things where I remember going to conferences and there'd be people straight up, people who can read Nietzsche, people who can read French, like nobody, we'd have a poem in complete French, and then it's like, oh, but the Spanish is so difficult. I just don't know what to do. Like I can pronounce Tchaikovsky, but I don't know about Lopez. And so there's this funny, obviously race is everywhere, and it's even in our literature. And I think right now the country and our communities reckoning with the racial politics and language. And in my work, give both my experience in terms of schooling, but also in poetry, there have been really sharp moments where there's been this frustration where we have this weird sleight of hand where we endow intelligence and labor to certain texts, like no one takes T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and says, oh, what the hell is he doing in that fourth section? Or what's up with these italicized? No, it's like, no, modernism is rigor. This has been going on for 100 years. And so all of a sudden, when POCs are coming out to the fore in a groundswell, like in poetry, and they are showcasing their talent, they're changing the game and the craft, it seems to me really stunning that we don't give those communities the same length of labor over their work. Another way of saying all this is, I remember, shout out to Dimitri Reyes, one of our other folks in the cohort, and he read one of my poems that was in the collection. It was, I think it was like Las Chacharas They Carried, which again, Las Chacharas They Carried, I don't know if it was you. I think he said like, make it a list poem, right? And it became 2 poems. So there are poems I have that actually multiplied and became different mutations of themselves. But be that as it may, Dimitri said to me, because I remember we were in Chiswara, we're talking, and everybody was like, I don't know, like this is kind of tough the scenes keep changing and it's a bit tough to keep on it and it's difficult. And then Dimitri said, well, Antonio's work, it makes you sweat because the people he talks about sweat. And I think that axiom is really important for me, that I need smart people to go through it because the communities I talked about went through it. It's a very fundamental, basic politic, but it's really important that in 2021, we have readers that really want to understand and immerse themselves in experiences that they have never encountered before. If we're really serious about the project of literature, which is to transform and create deep radical empathy, that mandates that all readers, no matter what background, really roll up their sleeves and say, I'm going to go through this book. And if I got to have a dictionary in one hand, if I got to have a thesaurus in the other, if I got to Google stuff, so be it. But we are in a time when we got supercomputers in the palm of our hands. There's no excuse, earthly excuse for us not to really immerse ourselves. And I will also say, in terms of, why I use Spanish, it definitely is, going back to the stanza idea that it's a room. If the poem is a house, then Spanish kind of allows me to, in other languages, and code switching, quote unquote, as I call it, allows you to open different parts, different partitions of that house. It's like, if I use a Spanish word, it's kind of like I'm closing the front door in some communities and I'm opening the garage door in other people. It's like the Spanish community is like, oh, I have a reference, an insider baseball reference that only we understand. If I say maceta, right? Even if you translate it, you see in the first poem, maceta toda mareada, you're like, okay, flower pot dizzy, but maceta is also slang for head in my community. And so only people who get that slang, even if you translate it, you might not get it. And I think there's something really humbling and important about not getting something, and allowing other communities to really shine and have those sources of sources of knowledge, those really important ways that they think about the world that hasn't been honored in letters traditionally, and having a book that in part tries to honor that and say, this is worthy, this is an intellectual enterprise, to have slang, to use vernacular, to play with language in these indigenous ways, in the Latino community and other communities. I think that's really important. And I want my work, even if it, creates alienation by some people, I think that's a good thing, because again, the theme of the book is alienation. So what better way to really empathize with the book than to reenact that sense of alienation, even if it's in a refined way of reading a book, and it's not some violent encounter of you being misnamed, mistreated, slighted, marginalized, and so forth. So I think I'm trying to reenact a lot of, within language, a lot of these encounters that I've had within, as a young guy growing up, which is feeling marginalized, feeling alienated, also feeling seen by other communities of color, that solidarity. And so language houses all of that. And so it's like, you can't go through the door, try the back door, because, historically that's how communities have felt. And I want people to have that. I want them to go through that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely, it's the play between Spanish and English in the book, what I really appreciated about it, and my knowledge of Spanish has been stunted. It's been like high school, and then it's pretty bad. But yeah, you make me work, which is great. I love it. It's like what Roger, this poet Roger Reeves, and I saw him the other day, and he was like kind of bemoaning how poetry, needs more rigor. And there's a lot of rigor in your poetry, because it's not a passive kind of reading. It's interactive. You have to if you're not of a certain culture, then you can either Google that shit, or but also if you are, then you have that portal, and it's a portal that doesn't prioritize this kind of white academic portal, which is great. And also it's a lot, it's not like Mad Libs, right? Your poems aren't Mad Libs where it's just like you have abuela here and there, it's not like this one Spanish word like just sprinkled throughout. I mean, you really kind of braid it into your poetry, which is great. I mean, all throughout the book, it's just there's hybridized form, hybridized language. One aspect of your book that I find really actually fascinating and new, I haven't really read this in other books or other meditations on identity, is this kind of hybridization of faith, and this conversion of into the Muslim faith. And I was wondering what were you thinking when you decided to write, when you were writing those poems? What did you want to kind of convey with writing those poems about Islam? Also, there seems to also be some kind of conflict or tension with the religion that you grew up with, which is Catholicism, which is also a kind of syncretic religion too, right? Because
Especially in Mexican form, absolutely.
yeah, the Mexican form, because it's Spanish Catholicism with indigenous. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much for it. I would say number one is so basic for me to say, but I feel like it's important to iterate that, maybe somebody looks at my book and the cover kind of plays with it, I guess.
Mhm.
Kind of like I always satirize stereotype. Like I
Mhm.
say in one poem, in Disney movies we're always chihuahuas. And
Mhm.
it's like I start with stereotype because that's where we start. That's the sort of this really playing with that gaze of expectation. When someone reads my book, what is the expectation of what's going to be in it? Because I've had to navigate the world in a lot of ways to engage with that gaze and get funded by it, get scholarships by it, get invested by it, but also there's that tension. And so, but understanding that the extension of conflict goes beyond the classroom, goes beyond these refined spaces, but really has these big collisions with family. But also that, yes, I grew up in a certain environment, but I fluctuated and changed and morphed as my environment did. So if I'm in North Carolina in a predominantly Black part of the South, then I'm going to be influenced because being there for 4 years, I'm going to try to find other ways of holding on to faith and holding on to community and really feeling nourished by my environment, especially because important to really iterate, when I left California to go to undergrad and go to school in general, I didn't have any family. All my family is in the northern part of the state, California. I have some folks in LA, most the rest in Mexico, one aunt, uncle in Illinois near Chicago, but that's it. And so I think I've been looking for it too. So maybe offline you can tell me this. There's this part of your book where you say the privilege of assimilation is silence, or I'm paraphrasing. And I thought that's, something on that matter. Really beautiful idea that when you become bred into certain spaces or embedded, there is this pain that happens of being removed. And so I have to then think about, what does it mean for me to be this identity? Can I hold on to this identity anymore when I've already been thereafter changed so much by having influences of other communities? And so for me, kind of this conversion experience is really a sincere, on a basic level, transmission to the reader that I am, transforming. I am looking to other communities or ways of thinking or expressions that are going to help to inform how I'm responding to the day. And I think saying that we transcend the boxes that we may be put in, and that this idea of Islam, as foreign as it is, trying to really make it this intimate portrayal of romance, but also of actual sincere engagement with the tradition. And in a book that explores race and identity, why can't that not be a part of the conversation? And so using the poem's experiences with other Muslim speakers, with readers, I really tried to painstakingly show, even in a short section, not a whole lot of time, that this was a sincere process that was equally as educational as my schooling was. And also showing to the reader that, this idea of family is not, as immigrants know, is not static, is not this constant source of warmth. There's a lot of, and even beyond the classroom, when going into politics, every generation challenges the one before it. And I think there really was this miseducation, going back to miseducation of our community about Islam, and the phobia and the fear. And, I converted around the time when the Paris tax happened. And so this is one of those things where you have this national optic of what something is, who people are, and then your own individual intimate experience of it. And I think what better way to transmit that than in poetry? And I think that definitely, what do I risk and what is at stake and lost or won in a conversion experience in an immigrant household. And secondly, when we have these life-changing things, whatever it may be, going to college, converting to a faith, a career in politics, all these things are going to create tension because our people have moved through fear for so long. They don't know what it looks like to move through hope and to have the premium as, what if this thing that he steps into can actually be life-changing for the better? In my experience right now, it's just, that's how survival is, that people want the status quo because at least I know what it is. And even if it has its deep problematics and concerns, I know what next week's going to look like. COVID has changed that, of course, but I think religion, politics, all these big life-changing things, college, they all threaten an immigrant generation's sense of its community, of itself, of its livelihood. And that's a risk that I tip my hat to all the kids going to college right now, is that they're trying to define what it means to be American at this moment, when it's really fragile and really scary to be an American for a lot of reasons. And so I'm kind of rambling, but I would say that the engagement with Islam is just a manifestation of the tumultuous change I experienced, the speaker experience, but also trying to really emphasize that these tensions and conflicts aren't just in this refined classroom space, but they're really painful separations and departures from family. And that's necessary in order for us to actually transform. That to gentrify oneself, we have to go back to the quote unquote gente and really rustle some things up and change. And only through that can that change really come about.
I was going to ask this later, but maybe I'll ask this now. I mean, I think that's very inspiring to hear. And it's also refreshing to read. I mean, it's inspiring to hear and to see you kind of facing these changes and kind of urging these changes upon these, like, your immigrant community or to other immigrant communities that, to kind of, that it's important to, that even though you are, change is scary and there is loss, but there is also kind of these influences you can have that's also, I don't know what's a word. I don't want to say for the better, but you have new experiences that can enrich your understanding of community and empower you. And with your when you talk about Islam in the book, I guess I'm thinking of also, my mind went to Malcolm X, right? And when he was towards later in his life, and when he started traveling and he realized that, Islam was a global faith, a non-white global faith. And it really kind of unified all of these Black and brown people from all over the world. And what I really appreciated about your book is the kind of interracial solidarities that you also bridge through language, through your kind of, and also your narration of being in Newark and finding these other, immigrant communities, Black communities that you found inspiration from. You are in city council in East Palo Alto. You have entered politics, and I was wondering, how does this idea of gentrification inform you as a politician, as a person who is coming back to your community?
Yeah, thanks again. These questions, I love them. As the kids say, I think going back to East Palo Alto was incorporated in 1983. So we are 38 years old, more or less. We're one of the last city. We're the last city to incorporate in the county. And so we came to the game very late. And we're one of the latest cities to incorporate in general in the state of California. And if for folks who may not know, politics of incorporation, that means you get to decide what to do with your city. You get your own police department, you get your own sanitation services, you get to decide what happens in your own area on a political level. And so it's important to underscore that, because much like first generation communities, you're kind of making it up from scratch, and you're going to make these big mistakes. And more importantly, you are bounded to a very fragile and fraught imagination of what you can do. And people in the in this community, there is this us versus them. There's the big tech money that doesn't know who we are, that are just coming in and taking over our neighborhoods and are changing the landscape. And I think the Black people in particular have been enormously disserviced because we haven't invested to keep those folks in these homes, and they move to the East Bay, they move to other parts of the state. And so we've experienced, for a city that was, incorporated predominantly by African Americans, they have had to leave, and they have been economically pressured to not live here. We have homes upwards of $1 million at this point in a city that in 92 was the murder capital rate. So in my lifetime, our generation has seen this really warped sense of our community where it was this kind of damp, wretched of the earth kind of setup. And now it's like this, real estate haven that is this beautiful, convenient commute between the city and San Jose. And that's within 20, 25 years. So how do you wrestle with that change? And more importantly, when we talk about gentrification, the reason why it's called gentrification is because, we have to acknowledge where we begin. Even if the beginning is really painful and difficult, we have to acknowledge where we started with. And where we are starting with is a very fragile, vulnerable community that is very sensitive to changes and has this apprehension of having people come into the neighborhood. Because once again, the change that has come into our lives 99% of the time has been to punitive or has been to a detriment. And so how do you collectively instill in people a sense of possibility, of hope, when that has not been institutionalized? So gentrification means that you have to engage with the forces itself, redefine the terms, but it's still the same matter. You have to reimagine the space so that it can provide more resources. So the same people that once sliced up a city for the sake of commute can come back to the table, their daughters or their children or grandchildren can say, you know what, the ways we did it was wrong. When we talk about development and developers, that has such a low Voldemort connotation to a lot of our community. And so developers that want to come to the city and provide benefits, there's no trust in that. And there's always this, like, I'm gonna keep my guard up because they might try to pull the rug under our feet. When, as a councilman, I get to have conversations with those folks. And I'm not saying that I'm giving a blank check for trust, but what I am saying is that if we really want to change things, we need to adapt. I mean, there is no possibility within our coffers and budget for us to prosper within our means. We have to really be strategic in leveraging resources from other communities, from the county, making noise, but that only comes about if we organize and come together. But the history of this country and our community has been division, suspicion, and so that divides us. And so you have to, and even in my election, there was racial tensions as well, because the Latino community has gradually over time become the dominant community in terms of numbers. And so again, how do you mitigate those tensions and fears that a community is facing and push us towards being organized and unified for us to actually get the monies and we deserve in order for us to provide basic services and elevate the quality of life? So gentrification is about understanding that in the bones of that term is this really sharp and painful force. But if we use poetry's project, which is to reimagine a better world, I think it's the most distilled form. Poetry is about reimagining. Then we can use this art form for us to imagine more restorative spaces of justice, more restorative spaces of healing, of again, prosperity. And that requires us taking leaps of faith. And I think it's hard to sell faith to a community that hasn't seen it in politics. And so poetry reminds me of like stillness and reimagining the possibility of a community, even when on the newspapers and in press, if it bleeds, it sells, and I think poetry will always allow me to be stubbornly hopeful and to try to exemplify what our community can look like and does look like. these aren't falsities. I'm depicting my community as I see it.
Mhm.
I want them to, I want the poetry to be a mirror for them to look at and say, that's how beautiful we are. We just have had other people tell our story, so we couldn't see it, or we've been so caught up, divided against each other. We haven't taken a moment to look at ourselves in our full luster and verve. And Antonio's poems, hopefully, in part, does that.
That's beautiful. And wait, I have so many things I want to say about that. I mean, like, in a way, you could say that that's a crucial function of poetry or literature, is to kind of reimagine alternate spaces or societies or worlds. And that's why culture is always way ahead of legislation. And you are one of the few who's trying to bridge the two, and I'm like, maybe that will make you a more effective politician in that way. I'm thinking about community and division, and I'm also thinking about my, this is coming from my perspective as an Asian American, and right now there seems to be a lot of divisions among Asian Americans, class divisions, regional divisions, ethnic divisions, and some conversations about how that term Asian American is even specious, that can't possibly exist or cover all of our differences. And I'm wondering if you think about this as a Latino, especially as now a public face, a public Latino figure, if you come across these tensions too, because I just think, well, this is not particular to Asian Americans. I'm sure Latinos also, deal with this all the time, especially in light of the 2020 elections and the many divisions between that. And like, I don't know. I don't even know where my question is going with this, but I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I guess it's like, like with Latinos especially, we hear this term, I hear this term tossed around a lot. Latinos are the sleeping giant. And then once they are actually, if they're actually totally mobilized, and they can really change this country. But then at the same time, you do see some Latinos, like Asian Americans, who do vote, and they're voting to close the door behind them. And so I don't, I'm just wondering, like, how do you now? I just want you to, if you could just talk about that.
Yeah, I think there is I think your instinct of drawing the two is good. It makes sense because there is this assimilationist idea, and all immigrants, I would say, but Asian communities, Asians kind of get the whole model minority. I think Latinos, to a great extent, if they could, they would too. It's just that, a lot of us economically come from the working class, but there's this aspiration to whiteness, to supremacy, especially in the Mexican community. I mean, you saw a lot of Mexican Americans in the Southwest, don the MAGA hats. A lot of because we're the hegemony, Mexican Americans and Mexicans. And I think there's a tension in my work where, yeah, I'm Latino, but in terms of the political capital of which nationality gets the most bang for its buck, I do think there is this racial hierarchies that Mexicans draw of saying, like, we're the best ones, or we're the poster children of this voting population. We pull our weight, so to speak. And there becomes this really insidious competition where it's like, which nationality does the most work, for the rest, and which one's kind of riding along. And it's really insidious, and I don't really approve of it. Because you get in the whole, there's anti-Blackness, there's anti-Central Americanness. There's so many ways that we perpetuate those borders that closed us off. And I think it's really tragic and ironic that we, as people who are victims, become also aggressors. But I also think that's the deeply colonial instinct and how we live and breathe. I mean, Spanish is a colonial language. I think what you are seeing is our culture has not been represented. And so when there are very singular issues like reproductive rights or cultural issues that the right can use, I think there is this out of touchness that Democrats and the left have sometimes, where it's like, these are communities that really care about very, very singular things. And it may seem trivial to some people, or it may seem like, well, wait a minute, why are you voting against your interest? It's because human beings are rational and irrational. And we have this thing called culture, which is very complicated, very fluid. But as you said, Kathy, like, poets are legislators of that culture, and we recreate that every day. And so you have to understand how a community is making sense of its surroundings, even if that sense making is really problematic and really violent and really horrible. You have to engage with how people start. In my line of work, like, I hear a lot of BS about how things are, but people who are in pain want their pain to be acknowledged. Like, I think so much of our country could just get their ish together if we took time to listen to each other's pains and where we're coming from, even if we think it's illegitimate, and it is, but that's how people feel. And part of humanity is really taking seriously this idea that fear can morph itself into really awful things, and yet it is fear in its most, in its essence. And I think Latinos and Asian Americans, number one, they're so variegated across nationalities that somebody who's Filipino in the Bay Area is going to be different than, Korean in LA. And there's so many different permutations, or Chinese in San Francisco. And I think this country just does a really abysmal job, and we do an abysmal job in really fleshing out those nuances. And I think once we begin to have more nuanced conversations about our communities, the better we can understand the problems and ultimately solve them.
That's great. I mean, how did you get into, when did you decide to get into politics?
I came back in March in the middle of the pandemic, and I was kind of saying earlier in our conversation, it was like this reverse culture shock because I was away for 8 years. I mean, I left in college when I was 18, like most kids. I came back at 26. So like, that's a really formative time in a young man's life. I mean, facial hair, leadership, sense of leadership skill, understanding of who I am, what I want to be in the world. Writing, I knew was going to be an important part, but I was gone for so long, Kathy. I didn't see my city change. It felt like you gave me 500 photos and then you left me with 3, and I got to see the changes like that. And it was this reverse culture shock almost, in a way, where I, as a person, grew so much. I was able to have so many opportunities. I saw the world, became a traveled man in a sense. And then my community, this small little town in the Silicon Valley, 2.5 square miles, was pretty much the same, and in some ways has declined because, again, people have been displaced. The pandemic hit. 1 out of 6 adults got COVID here in the city, and you saw it. People were, this city's essential workers par excellence. And even that term I effing hate so much because of the horrible kind of tongue-in-cheek satire. It parodies itself. But at any rate, so, you saw the pain, and I was over here kind of laden with prestige and with opportunity. I was going to Stanford in the fall. And I said, damn it, like, and there's no leadership, there's no youth being part of the council. I got to step up and at least try to showcase to the community that, it can be done, that if you don't have any political experience, if you have no insider knowledge of this, our own tenacity and our ability to be creative, the ganas as a community, that is more than enough to get you across the other side. And more importantly, kind of encouraging people, even if the state, and especially the state, is fraught and horrible, it does have resources, especially in the state of California. I also work for the Senate in terms of my day job for a local senator. And I'm telling you, the millions of dollars the state has is just almost ludicrous. And so often it just requires people knowing who to talk to. But because we're so overworked, busy, worrying about how to give our kids diapers, we don't have time to understand the labyrinth of the state, of resources. And if my job is literally just to refer to people, to talk to this person, to go to this agency, like, I can sleep well at night because I'm using the privilege that I've been able to accrue, painfully wrought and brought into something that I can actually feed more community and more folks than myself. And so I ran on a whim. It was more just, even if I lose, I still win by understanding my community more. And I show people that it can be done, because people who have been in the city, my age, have considered running, but no one ever took the, few have taken the plunge. So I'm like, no, we need more people to get involved and shake this thing up. Can't just be me. So I just want to start something. That's all. That's all.
So would you say then that that's a kind of a journey of gentrification where it's just like you talk about education being a separation from family, a separation from community, and you went to Oxford and you're at you went to Duke, Rutgers, Newark, Oxford, and you just accrued all of this knowledge, and then you're bringing it back. You're taking it back, and it could have easily, so many people, I mean, you know, I could see people, people I know are just, they gain the education and then they just leave for good, or they work for a bank or they're a professor. So, and then you're you've returned.
Exactly. It goes back to this beautiful kind of concept and negritude of Aimé Césaire, of return to my native land, or in post-colonial theory, whatever you want to call it, the native intellectual Fanon. It's this idea that if we've been damned as a community, as an ethnos, as a village, and if there are those few of us who've had the privilege of really having the isolation and white noise necessary to study oneself in our community, then we have a civic duty, wherever it may rear. It doesn't have to be politics, to return and to instill and to inspire and to fail in public what it looks like for us to pass on that baton. We haven't passed on the baton. What you see, exactly right, Kathy, that East Palo Alto has many famous people. We have athletes, we have actors, we have artists, but most of them leave the city in order for them to prosper. But I want my community to provide the means and resources for them to stay here and to give back. But we haven't done that yet. Again, it's important to understand our role in history. We're less than 40 years old. We are smack dab in the middle of the fourth richest county in the state, the richest zip codes in the country. This is a black and white dichotomy that we grew up with, and we're still making sense of our position, let alone trying to actually compete with Microsoft, with Facebook, with these tech monoliths and oligarchs. And so for those of us who have been in the pockets of poverty, but have been able to, mobilize ourselves into other spaces, I fully believe we owe it to ourselves, to our community, for us to return and to be able to share those experiences. And also because on a selfish level, I just hate being the minority of the minority, of like that this is a success story. I really resent the term, because it's sort of like this, Gregory Partlow talks about it with Unapologetic. It gives this idea that you have to apologize for something. You don't. We're just trying to flourish. We're just trying to, my parents came to this country and they had this American dream idea of El Norte, that I'm going to give my kid a better education. And yet there's so many cracks in this dream. And it's not that I believe in it, but it's that people believe in it, and that most of my people believe in it. And so that is enough for me to say, then we have to invest and give our livelihoods to this work, wherever it may be. It doesn't have to look like one profession. But if we abstain or depart from that work and go into other industries, I don't blame you. I don't judge you, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's I don't know. I think like if we can take that, if there's a generation of poets, or not poet, it could be anyone who can do that, who can take what they learn and funnel that resources back into their community. Maybe we may stand a chance. We have 10 minutes left, and I was thinking that maybe you could read a poem. I don't know if you want to read. I was like, I don't know. I was really, I love all the poems. I'm actually trying to like make up my mind which poem I want you to read. I kind of want you to read Nation. Well, can you read Nation Time Remix? I wanted to also ask you about Magical for Realism. And I was like thinking that it'd be fun for you to read one of those poems too.
I can read that.
Okay. All right. Maybe you could read one of those poems and then you could talk about that name, that term that you coined. How about it?
Yeah, you got it. I will read magical realism, not the section final, but I will read the actual definition.
Oh,
Is that good?
sure.
All right. Magical realism. To read of the ghosts that haunted Macondo and see Moises's head stapled to a telephone pole, his mom's in a white scarf hands out flyers to the fat paletero stalked outside McNair. Disculpe, señor, pero has visto? But he just counts singles. The boys whose hips are already swollen with dead presidents and cold metal, the only children he sees. Root, to take literature of Latin America and learn your Moises, still missing from the syllabus. You ask these white novelistas, where am I? No answer, but an essay where Octavio calls you a tangle of contradictions. First known use, 7th grade. Miss Nelson told the Mexican kids to stop speaking Spanish. So I decided to live in the mouths of Devante, Michael, and the other Black boys. Each a sanctuary city to hide from detention. At recess, the black top sweltered with ciphers, lips like purple spigots leaked songs from their Nokias. They beat their chests, top drums that must have nursed beats from the studio apartments where knuckles met flesh. When I recited their bars, each word curved as it left me like an exit wound. Barrio Britannica.
Thank you. That's a beautiful poem. So what is magical for realism?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's you know, first of all, it's important to understand that the poem, the speaker revels in liminality, and Latinos, US Latinos have historically lived in this kind of like borderlands of literatures. You know, American studies doesn't really kind of want to embrace this wholesale. Latin America's like, well, you guys are in the US, so you know, you got that. And so we're kind of in this kind of bastard position where nobody wants to claim us. And there's this idea that we're not pure enough to be part of any tradition. And yet, you know, here we are Latinos in our full flesh and fervor. And so magical for realism extends this kind of famous Garcia Marquez, sometimes fetishized concept of magical realism, which is that, you know, and Ariel Dorfman calls it the marvel, which is that, you know, the violence, the scale of violence and horror that was seen in Latin America in the so-called third world was so extreme that in literature, it created this surreal sense of landscape, of place. And so, you know, you have these scenes in Macondo of ghosts haunting the land, or of children eating the walls, or of ants invading houses. And you're like, did that really happen? And it's like, that's not the question. It's, what does that have to say about the magnitude of violence in this place where that is the excess of aesthetic, of image that occurs? And so to me, it's like growing up in these Palo Alto, going back to the bedlam and violence that I saw growing up. Similarly, we had some experiences where I'm like, is this really happening in California, in our city? And I always tell people, you know, I'm young enough to have seen the changes in East Palo Alto, but I'm old enough to have still remember the violence in our doorsteps, and to see and to really grow with, you know, I told my little brother, you know, he's like, oh, you know, there's a kid wearing, you know, passing by wearing red and a red cap. And I'm like, you know, Aaron, growing up, like, we couldn't wear red. It's not that we couldn't wear red, but it's if you wore red, that meant you were a part of something. And now it doesn't mean that anymore. It's even like, I have this joke I want to make, this poem I'm going to write one time where it's like, at one point, like ode to Target, where I can wear red and I don't gotta watch my back. You know, there's this idea that like there's this trauma that I've seen, and like kids that have been missing, kids that got shot, kids that left this earth, and it's like, is that not the same thing? Is that not an extension of Latin America? Is this not part of this tradition, damn it? And Latin American white novelists, by and large, have dismissed us, have disregarded us, have said, no, it is not that. And so there's this really racial politic. There's a class politic. A lot of these Latin American writers, you know, are well-to-do. And a lot of us that came up are working class, the sons of campesinos, the sons of farm workers. And so there's this real frustration where it's like, well, I would be in Mexico if my parents thought it would give me a good life. You know, I didn't grow up in Mexico City. We grew up in a small hamlet, in a ranch, a village, I should say. And so here am I trying to talk back in Spanish, and yet we still are seen as the kind of stepchildren of a tradition. And there's so much racism behind that. And so magical for realism, finish it up real quick. You know, I'm in proximity of Black communities, the Black vernacular, the Black sound, quote unquote, Black aesthetics, you know, that has influenced my work because of my neighborhood. And so for real, you know, it's like, you know, for real, like really, you know, so it's like, it's taking AV, it's taking other vernaculars and embedding them in an ostensibly Latin American, non-Black literary genre.
Oh, that's great. I want you to come back to Rutgers and do a lecture on like magical for realism.
I will. There is a book by I forget his name, but it's called Paraíso, and it was a Canto Mundo selected book, and he had a section called Magical Rationalism, and that inspired me to think, oh shit, magical. Maybe I gotta play with that. So magical for realism.
Yeah.
You know, I will definitely give that talk, and I'll tell you how it came about.
Do it. I want to hear that full hour-long talk. I'm so curious. It's so great. Just thinking about so much. But anyway, we're almost out of time. Do I have time for one more question? I just wanted to ask if you had any advice you want to give to the Notre Dame students out there, aspiring poets.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah.
No, to all my Notre Dame people out there and beyond, is people have asked me like, how do you write a poem? Like, I've been writing poems. Where would you suggest I start? I said, honestly, poetry abounds us. It's around us. Poetry is the way your mother says your name. Poetry is how, you know, women gossip among themselves. Your aunts gossip among themselves. Poetry is the cadence of your pastor. Poetry is your coach telling you to go to the 50-yard line. It's again, going back to racism and race. We don't extend the prestige of literariness, of poetics to other communities, but I fully believe, it could be the ethnographer in me, that like literature and what is worthy of literature is around us. We just have to press our ear to the earth and really hear it, really observe. You know, Terry Eagleton says, the very literary theorist, literature is just awareness of language. Right? So that awareness is portable. You can take that awareness like a Wi-Fi anywhere you want. You can go to a McDonald's and hear poetry. You can go to a gas station, hear poetry. So if you want to start writing, it's not about reading Shakespeare. It's about understanding that poetry isn't just Shakespeare. Poetry isn't just the stuff you read growing up. Not even Langston Hughes. You know, poetry is literally anything. It is an obsession of the artist. That is it. So whatever you're obsessed about, whatever you're really seriously thinking about, an ode to a tomato, an ode to your favorite Nike shoes, an ode to your grandmother, all of those things are worthy of it because you, the speaker, deem it as such. So I encourage all the aspiring writers to understand you already have what it takes. All we can teach you is how to craft and chisel those sculptures, but you have the raw matter to work with it. It's just unlearning that poetry is this isolated, removed, pristine thing that is only bounded in certain texts, but that is literally ubiquitous. It's literally around you. And, you know, I would suspect that a lot of Notre Dame students are coming from different communities and backgrounds. And so you're going to have this rich tradition, and poetry needs your voice. Poetry needs your intervention to give us those imaginations we need to be better human beings. So onward and upward. Remember, you already have the poetry. You just got to listen to it.
Thank you. That was fantastic. We're at the end of our session. Thank you all. Thank you, Antonio. Yeah, peace.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone.